Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Eurowatch, the world's best show on Euro 2021. I am joined by the ever wonderful Ritwik. Now, Ritwik, before I ask you how you are today, I am miserable because Lille have just drawn 0-0, which means I have to wait until next Sunday for them to be crowned champions. Are you feeling much of the same, or have you been biting into La Liga today?
I've been biting more into La Liga, man, if I'm being honest. I think La Liga and Serie A for different reasons. La Liga because Barcelona's effectively out. They lost today. And I think Atleti came from behind and Real won 1-0. So it's going to go to the final match. It's going to be an all-out slugfest between both the Madrid clubs. But in Italy, second to fifth could all change. Come the next game week. Of course, Napoli, Milan, and Juventus are going to be jockeying for two spots. Atalanta, I think, are all but confirmed because a head-to-head versus Juventus is better. That's how Italy does it. But yeah, that's going to go down to the wire. The top four race in England's going to go down to the wire. It's the way these leagues should end. I wish all of them ended with a title race, but you take what you can get.
It's like four leagues of hotly interesting races and Germany.
And Germany, yes. Yes.
And Germany just chilling there. But we're not going to be talking about, well, we might a bit. Well, we've got a few things lined up today. We're going to be tackling a few news stories, and then later on in the podcast, I sit down with Alfie from WestHamOnline, a very popular West Ham channel, and he gives his heart and some very, very good research and analysis on why Declan Rice is maybe the second most important player for England. Yeah, he came out with that just behind Harry Kane, but he did actually put some really good logic into it, so stand up for that. But Ritwik, we're going to be covering some news, aren't we?
Yeah.
What would you like to cover first?
So, as some of you might know, there has been a change in Spain. If you pay attention to the last pod, or I think 2 pods ago, Alex was quite insulted when I said Spain will exit with their tail behind their legs. But there's a reason why I'm going to change that opinion, because Aymeric Laporte, Man City's centre-back, is now been approved by FIFA to switch allegiances from France to Spain. And now you're probably wondering, Aymeric Laporte, great Rolls Royce of a centre-back, why hasn't he played for France yet? Now, the reason is he played for France all the way from under 17 to under 21 level. And he played in the youth teams pretty well. But for some reason, Deschamps always fancied players like Rafael Varane, Samuel Umtiti, Adel Rami, just to name a few. And he sort of got lost in the mix and, wasn't getting games. Then when Deschamps did call him up, either he was injured or Deschamps didn't even use him in the squad. Now, as far as the rules go, you need to have played 3 friendlies, I believe, or played an international game. Once you've done that, you can't switch allegiances. I know Diego Costa played 2 friendlies for Brazil, but obviously Spain needed a centre forward, so he came in. We're hoping, at least I'm hoping, that Laporte's switch doesn't end as badly as Costa's did for the national team, because he was utterly dire. But why? You're probably wondering, wait, how does he qualify to represent Spain? He is also of Basque descent. Now, Basque is a region between France and Spain, covers a bit of the Pyrenees Mountains. And essentially what that means is that he was born there. That is a part of Spain. Whether you want to go into the politics of it or not is a different matter. But he rose up the ranks at Athletic Club de Bilbao, which, if any of you know, only play people from the Basque region, primarily pretty much play people from their academy. And he is Basque, and he qualified to represent Spain. Spain need a centre-back, especially a centre-back of his quality. France maybe don't. Now, there is controversy. We always give you the spicy news here at Eurowatch. And Alex, do you know, people in France aren't pretty happy.
I can imagine they're not very happy, Ritwik.
Emmanuel Petit, former World Cup winner, said it was opportunistic of him to just switch allegiances.
Oh,
Says, how can you
piss
just
off, Petit.
how can you just decide you're in Spain? I was like, this is fine. Laporte finally can play for a national team, and he'll do really well in Spain, especially alongside, the loss of the summer wild of Sergio Ramos. This might suck for some people in Spain, especially Pau Torres of Villarreal, um, uh, Inigo Martinez of Athletic Club, or even Eric Garcia. Incidentally, Laporte's teammate at Man City, although he is going to leave at the end of the season. And all of them have had caps for Spain, but none of them have really stuck in. And this is the right time. He's 26. He's in the peak of his career. He's actually fit and firing. He did get replaced by John Stones halfway through the season, so that's a bit of a gray area on how to judge Laporte. But he's as good as they
He's
come.
a world-class centre-back. World-class centre-back.
Maybe just a shy of world class, but yeah, definitely top tier.
And it means, as you were touching on, like with Spain's depth, there's really Atletico Bilbao's former clubs, Inigo Martinez, Villarreal's Pau Torres, and the aforementioned Eric Garcia, who, especially Garcia, has really been played for the national team. So it's not as if Laporte is going to have to come in about. He's going to be one of the leaders, and when Ramos goes, he probably will be the leader of the back line. So
that's actually nothing. That's something I didn't even consider. This is going to be Ramos's last tournament.
Yeah, so Laporte could be, not only will he be a Spanish international, he could be the Spanish international. He'd be their best defender going forward. Unless, of course, Eric Garcia really booms up. But I think my thoughts on this, Ritwik, it's something I tweeted at the time. France are now, I think in a few years, we're going to look back at France and say, you kind of wish they didn't have this depth. Because what's happening is they're sacrificing their generations who are now going to their allied nations and playing for them. Especially if you look at Africa, if you look at Senegal, you look at Mali and Cote d'Ivoire, these nations are building genuinely good teams. Like Senegal's team right now, based off players who would have played for France but have decided either to play for their parent club Senegal because maybe that's what they feel more allied to, or they literally just can't get in. They are really got a strong team. You've got Crepin Diatta of Monaco, you've got Koulibaly, you've got Idrissa Gueye, you've got Habib Diallo, you've got Boulaye Dia, you've got Sadio Mane. It is a bit of a meme with me that I look at Senegal.
It's almost like it's gone the other way. You had so many promising talents coming from Africa, making the treacherous journey to come to France and play against all odds. And obviously you've seen that in people like N'Golo Kante in the past, with people like Zidane. And this is I think a good thing for African nations. You have players who are trained in some pretty in academies and with resources that they would have never had in Africa.
It's like they're going on loan to France.
Exactly. And obviously you have if you didn't recognize some of the names Alex mentioned, I'll give you more. Rafael Guerreiro, Portugal's left back, born and raised till the age of 8 in Paris. Riyad Mahrez, same situation. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. These are people who could have easily represented France.
Even upcoming players like Ismail Assar of Watford, who's been hotly tipped of success. So yeah, I think Laporte is just one man in a line of players who's come through going for the French national team, is not getting through, and is subsequently bolstering other nations. So it's a really interesting story. But let's move on, Ritwik, from one centre-back who's had a bit of controversy to a centre-back who has basically been out of the limelight this season. It's Virgil van Dijk, and that's because, as you rightly pointed out in our notes, and as he came out and confirmed pretty much, Virgil van Dijk has been officially ruled out of Euro 2020-21, which means he will not be turning out.
Sad Iranian music.
He'll be not be turning out for Frank de Boer's nation, and the Netherlands are left in defence with just, I had it up a minute ago, it's just Daley Blind, it's just Matthias de Ligt, which obviously is still pretty good, and St. Just of, I think it might be Wolfsburg, can't remember, a Bundesliga club. So
here's how I see it. At centre back, I don't think the Netherlands have ever had this much depth, because obviously even without Virgil van Dijk, they have Matthias de Ligt and Stefan de Vrij. Very good centre back pairing, very very good. You also have I believe Sven Botman as well.
Yes. And, he's finally gonna get in.
Yeah, and if they need him, Nathan Aki and Dali Blind, who can also play that. That's 5 people, 3 of whom have sufficient international experience. What they're actually going to miss, and I alluded to this when we talked on Football Arania's podcast. We'll link that in the description. Is a leader. Essentially a leader. They're devoid of leadership. Virgil van Dijk would have given that. He's a threat from set pieces. He's a threat from corners. He's a big presence, and they're gonna miss that. In a very strict defensive sense, I think they can cope, but without having a leader like that, you've seen what it did to Liverpool. I mean, obviously they didn't have Jordan Henderson either, but you saw how they crumbled. You saw they completely crumbled as soon as Van Dijk was gone. But here, there's another weave to this story, and I'll cast our listeners' minds back to 2 World Cups ago in Brazil when Louis van Gaal's Netherlands side romped up, a side which did have Stefan de Vrij. But it was interesting because Van Gaal had played a very good qualifying round, pretty much in a 4-3-3 with Kevin Strootman, in the center of center of defensive midfield. He was dictating everything. He gets injured right before the tournament begins, and he essentially switches everything. He goes from a 4-3-3 classical Dutch total football to a 3-5-2, which at that time was like, how are they going to do this?
This is pre-Conte.
This is pre-Conte, and they had Nigel de Jong in central defensive midfield. And this is a man whose best days had already passed him, but they made it work through, because everyone was caught off guard. Everybody was caught off guard. No one exactly knew who was going to step up or how he was going to play. And then you had Arjen Robben and Robin van Persie running absolute riot. You had crosses coming in from Blind. You had that fantastic header. Daryl Janmaat on the right, obviously. So my roundabout point with all of this is that necessity is the mother of invention, and they could invent something here. But the main difference is that this team is led by Frank de Boer, and that team was led by Louis van Gaal. And there's a substantial difference between the both of them. There's a substantial difference, and I don't think de Boer will pull anything out of the bag.
Well, just as a side bit from Ritwik's point, because I think Ritwik summed up well. I want to take this moment to moan at the Independent, because this was essentially confirmed by the Netherlands and the KNVB releasing their provisional squad for the Euros of the Dutch national team, which Van Dijk obviously doesn't feature in. And if it was posted free on their Twitter, and the Independent did an article on it, and you have to pay to read it. And I was just looking at it through this before this podcast. I was like, you fucking money robbers! I'm not paying to look at a picture that's on Twitter. You get out of here, Independent. That was
get out of here.
It's a side point. I was just like, you know what? You get out. I've never done it until now. I hope they go bust. Anyway, do you want to move on to the last topic? One that I wasn't. I think you're gonna have to take the lead on, because Ritwik's put in our pod notes about Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Now, I saw the last news lately that he got injured in the Milan game, and he was out for 3 weeks, and he's hopefully back in time for the Euros. But Ritwik, judging by the notes you've written down, is a bit different. So please tell me all and give our listeners the knowledge, because from my understanding, obviously from a lot of understanding, last news thing that we did was that Ibrahimovic was returning for the Swedish national team. Is that not so now?
It was not to be. It was not to be. Much like the other Swedish powerhouses of ABBA, Ibrahimovic's career is going to end with a whimper. Obviously not with divorce, but like you see the parallel I'm trying to create. Ibrahimovic was asked to come back to the national team because of all what he'd been doing with Milan. He was literally leading and willing this club to the top of the Serie A. And Ibrahimovic said, okay, you know what? I'm coming back. And it really seemed like, this is what they were missing in the qualifiers. They were missing a finisher, because Alexander Isak of Real Sociedad just has it in him, but doesn't have it yet. And that's what's officially sort of like hampering this the Swedish charge. And Ibrahimovic is going to come in, settle in some youngsters, provide the experience and the depth needed. but his knee ligament damage is too bad. As some of you might remember that he did injure his MCL for Man United towards the end of his first stint, and that was his first major injury in his entire career. He'd kept himself in the peak of physical conditioning, and it's now happening. He's 39 years old. It was bound to happen at some point. We have loved to come here and then like roar through the Euros and really show everybody who's struggling at maybe the mid 30s age that you take care of yourself and you put yourself out there. It'll happen. But it's time for someone else to step up, because with this injury, I think it's done for Ibrahimovic. I think his watch has ended,
Very
and
sad.
it's going to be.
Sorry, go on. It's going to be what?
Yeah, no. Continue. I was pretty much done with my
enough. I was just going to say it's on the flip side of what you were talking about. It really is the pressure on Alexander Isak. I did a short on him recently, a bit of football short, which you can find on my Twitter or TikTok. And there's a lot of hype around him at the moment. He's got 14 non-penalty goals this season for Sociedad, as he said. But sometimes he's a streaky striker, basically, a bit like Vardy. Sometimes he'll go missing for a few games, then he'll come back. And for the national team, he's only got 2 goals in his last 13 matches. So you can definitely see why Zlatan was on the cards to come back. And it's a lot of pressure now on a 21-year-old Alexander Isak to lead his national team for the Euros. Because I think Sweden, for me, are probably one of the weakest nations at this tournament in terms of not just their quality, but just their preparation. Like you look at, like even North Macedonia, they've got a couple of wins recently, obviously against Germany. You feel the momentum there. This is their first major international tournament. I think the only other national team I look at and I'm a bit more worried for than Sweden is Wales, who are literally like the worst prepared nation for a sporting. I don't think, I'm doing a bit of work on it recently. Wales, I counted it as 6 players in the Welsh national team, right, who have been relegated this season. It's appalling for them. And Sweden are just above them.
Bad. That's bad.
Quick prediction, Ritwik. How many goals do you think Alexander Isak gets at Euro 2021?
2.
2?
I'm hopeful. I think it's 2.
I'm going to go for 1. I'm going 1.
A penalty?
No. I don't think it'll be a penalty. It'll be like a nice fox in the box moment, and he just buries it in the bottom corner.
Beautiful
Indeed. Right, well, I think this would be the point of the podcast where we would cut to Alex's interview with WestHamOnline. So let's hear about why Declan Rice is one of England's most important players and a bit more on his background. Let's head over to Alex now. We have been introduced by Alex from Eurowatch. It is Alex with Mr. WestHamOnline, the very popular West Ham page, who's now blowing up from Instagram onto Twitter, a very good friend of mine too. How are you doing, mate?
I'm doing okay. I'm pretty sure our rivals Tottenham are winning, so that's put a bit of a damper to the mood. But apart from that, I'm doing well.
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking about, as I would have mentioned on the podcast, going to be talking about a player that must make you smile a little bit, Mr. Declan Rice, because I think he's been a little bit of a hot topic, definitely for England, especially earlier in the fixtures. And I still think for casuals who don't watch him often, there's a bit of a lazy opinion out there that he's quite a boring sideways player. And I don't think that's true. And I know you won't think that's true. So I thought I'd get an expert on as Mr. Okay. I was going to call you Alfie from WestHamOnline. I'm not sure if you'd like to keep your name hidden anymore. Is that okay, Mr. WestHamOnline?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
All right, we're going to call you Alfie now. Alfie, obviously you've been watching West Ham all season. And me and you come from similar backgrounds of analysing football. So to the Eurowatch listeners, they can take your word as gospel. I want to start with Rice going into the season, because going into West Ham season, I'll be the first one to admit I thought you guys would get relegated. How did Declan Rice do last year? What was the expectation for him this year in terms of his performance and what he did on the pitch?
Yeah, I think we had an expectation for him to do really well this season individually, because in the first half of last season, he was still probably our best player with Angelo Ogbonna, but he certainly had limitations to his game. And as soon as we signed Thomas Souček and he was able to express himself a bit more and able to not do all the dirty work, because before Souček arrived, he was having to do the job of two people on frequent occasions because Mark Noble and Carlos Sanchez were either in poor form or just weren't good enough. And since Souček's arrived, he's been brilliant, Declan Rice. And I think overall he's a fantastic player. So individually, I thought he'd do really well this season. The team I didn't have a lot of faith in, if I'm honest, but I had a lot of courage that Rice individually would be our best player.
Brilliant. Well, there's something I want to hit on there because I think you kind of touched on. I was going to bring up in the stats because for the past 3 seasons, well, since Rice has broken through, he's always been top pretty much in the Premier League tackles, interceptions, and he's doing a lot less of the defensive work. So, what's he done different this season? Is he doing a lot more for West Ham attacking wise?
Yeah, I think what's happened is obviously in 18-19 and 19-20, in 18-19 he completed 4.4 tackles and interceptions per game on average. And in 19-20 it was an improvement at 507 tackles and interceptions per game on average. And this year it's gone down to 3.8, which for me is a good thing. And people are going to say what you're on about, it's a good thing. Once again, the fact that he doesn't have to do the job of two people means that he can conserve a lot of his energy. He uses it going forward, and his dribbling has really progressed over the last 7 or 8 months or so. He's really improved going forward. And since Thomas Souček's arrived, Souček is also capable defensively. Rice has been able to express himself going forward, and he hasn't had to do as much running defensively, and he's not had to cover too many areas.
It's not like he's Moses and holding back the sea anymore. Like he's got a bit of help.
Yeah. He's got help now. He's finally got some assistance, and I feel like his game has progressed because of it, despite what this stat may suggest.
Yeah, that was really well explained there, mate. So let's move into England because it's died down a little bit recently, mainly because international football was boring the last round of fixtures. But in September, when England they were drawing 0-0 against Denmark and like scraping past Iceland, right? From what I remember, especially at the time, me and Ritwik were covering it, Mason Mount and Declan Rice were getting the majority of like the abuse from watching England pass it sideways for like 90 minutes. Now, I have my own opinions on it, and I feel like they're aligned with yours, but I want to ask your opinion on that. Was it fair for England fans to criticise Rice for that, or was he not really at fault?
I feel like that was the role that Southgate gave him. I'd put a lot of the blame on Southgate overall because I think in those fixtures, particularly his formations, the 5 at the back, the 2 defensive midfielders, it was all a bit too defensive for the opposition we was facing. And you were right, Rice and Mount were getting a lot of the blame. And it's interesting now because people have seemed to gone the complete opposite way, especially on Mount. People seem to adore Mount now. And it's because I think people were just looking for a scapegoat when the real scapegoat was Southgate. I don't think Southgate is a horrific manager, but I think Rice and Mount were just doing what they were told to do. They were covering the areas they were told to do. I don't believe Rice was given the opportunity to express himself at the time. And a lot of his passes for England, if I'm honest, were 5-yard safe passes, which I'll be honest, a lot of other defensive midfielders are praised for keeping it simple. But because it was Rice, he was getting a lot of slander for that. And I feel like now people have gone the complete other way because we've been a lot more. Chelsea and West Ham especially have done really well this season, and Mount and Rice have been able to express themselves. So people have seen that it wasn't their fault the way they were playing for England.
Yeah, I get you. And just another thing to throw in there about it, because I think like you just put out there really nicely about how Rice has like changed his game a little bit this season. He's been allowed to express himself, as you say, and go forward. And like his dribbles have definitely picked up as well. Do you think for England he's kind of been given his old role? Like, do you think he's asked to be the sitter when, like as you say, he can push forward, but for England, Southgate saying, "No, I want you to defend."
Yeah, I think he has, because when I watch Rice and Phillips play together for England, it seems to be Phillips who's going forward more than Rice.
Yeah, I thought that.
And what's interesting is for West Ham this season, Declan Rice is in the top 98 percentile for long passes completed in Europe in terms of percentage. And for England, he just seems to play a lot of short passes and keeps it simple. Whether that's just because of Southgate's game plan or not, I think it is personally. So yeah, I think he's been given his old role, just the destroyer, the man who wins the ball back, sits deep, and is disciplined. And that's the sort of role he was playing, especially in 2018-19, and for about 6 months of 1920.
Damn. Well, I love the stat, by the way, about the long passes thing, because that's something I didn't spot, and that is a lot more eye opening, like how much he has progressed then. And you're completely right. Watching England were just sideways passing. So I guess on that, with Rice, like even though he can play forward, are you happy for him to sit back for England? Because I think the one thing England miss, I know this gets spoken about a lot, besides Rice and Calvin Phillips, they don't really have someone who can sit and defend. Do you think Rice is beginning to outgrow that now? Or do you think he'd be happy to still do that for England and be that man?
I think he'd certainly be happy with it. I don't think Rice is the sort of guy to complain, but I think he can do a lot more than what he's given permission to do. I think the reason for it is he's probably the best at sitting back, and every top team needs a player who does the defensive work in midfield. And then Southgate's probably thinking, well, we don't need him to go forward because we have the likes of Mount, Grealish, Sterling, all these players creating the chances for Harry Kane. So I think that's the reason why. I think he's more disciplined than Phillips. I think Phillips is a player who wins the ball back a lot, but doesn't seem to, when I've watched him, sit as deep and isn't as disciplined as Rice. I think he covers wrong areas at times, and I don't think he'd be able to play the role that Rice does for England, certainly. So I can see why Rice has been assigned that role. I'd like to see him express himself a bit more, but once again, I can see why Southgate's done it because of the players he has in front of him.
Yeah, and just on that note, because obviously he was injured recently and he's come back now, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's say worst case scenario, Rice misses the Euros. He misses the Euros for England. How do you think Southgate replaces him? Who do you think is best placed to replace Rice in that deep midfield? Is it Phillips, or after what you just said about how, like, I don't watch him enough to actually comment on it, but it's not an outlandish take, definitely, to say he's not going to be as disciplined as Rice, especially when he's in a Bielsa system. Like, do you think Phillips is the man, or do you think Rice is at this point is kind of, he's the only player in that England squad who can do what he does?
I think he is the only player. I think Henderson's probably, although Henderson isn't as good defensively as Rice, he'd be my backup for that role if worse comes to worse, Rice gets injured. But then again, you've got to think, is Henderson even going to be available? Which we'll wait and see. I'm not confident if Phillips plays in that area that he'll have the discipline to cover and plug the gaps against the likes of Belgium, France, any of the teams that we have to face in the latter stages of the Euros, if of course we reach them. So I think if Rice is injured, we'll be in bother in that area. And I personally think he's probably in the top 2 or 3 names for Southgate on the team sheet, just for the limitations we have options-wise in that specific position.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess as well, it's not as if that it's not as if there's no players sort of like him who could defend in the England team. But if he goes out, I think you're right there. I don't think there's any other player, maybe besides Phillips, who can at least argue to be a lone six. I think if Rice goes out, say if England playing a 4-3-3, I think if Rice is injured, Southgate would instantly switch to like a double pivot in midfield, because you'd want two midfielders to do the work that Rice usually does. And then, like you're saying, if Henderson goes back, Henderson's really good going forward. So it's like bringing more problems out. Just as a side thing, because the way you spoke about Rice this season is kind of made me think, do you think Rice is almost like let's say another defensive midfielder comes through. Let's say Phillips does become that player. Do you think Rice could be like a sort of like a Henderson mold, move into that right centre midfield position in a 4-3-3 and be a bit more box to box in a way?
Yeah, I think he could. I think although this is going to sound weird to say, although he's only scored 4 goals for West Ham, I think his technique, shooting wise, and when he gets near the goal in terms of creating as well, I think when he gets in those areas, he's really good at it. So yeah, I think he certainly could do. I think he's tidy on the ball now. He's really hard to get off the ball just because of how the strides he takes. He's like a dammer in a way. Don't get me wrong, he's nowhere near as strong and powerful. But he's one of those players that hasn't got a low centre of gravity, but can just burst through gaps and is really intelligent in the way he does it. His body positioning as well is fantastic. So I think he certainly could do. I'd personally rather see him a little bit more defensive, but have the freedom to, when he wants to, go forward like he can for West Ham.
So maybe in a double pivot, a 4-2-3-1.
Yeah. I think him and Henderson would probably work really well together in that role.
That's interesting. Before we have a fun one in England, it's like hop back to West Ham a bit, because he's definitely had. I think this obviously has been his best season yet, and he's become a lot more all-rounded. And those Chelsea rumours will never go away, even though I kind of think they've taken a bit of a back burner since Lampard left. How long do you think West Ham keep Rice? And you can say forever, or you can say like 4 months. What do you think?
See, I think I would say if we don't get top 6 this year, he could probably go. But then again, I just don't know who would be able to sign him, because Chelsea, the owners have made it clear that he's certainly not a priority. I think the reason that came from The Athletic, and I think the reason behind it is because they would be embarrassed about re-signing.
Yeah, and that's such a stupid reason. Stupid reason.
So I think Chelsea's out the equation. United and City are probably the 2 that I think could happen, but City certainly don't need to spend huge amounts of money on Rice. I'm not a huge fan of Rodri, I must admit, probably an unpopular opinion. But I think passing-wise, he's probably better than Rice. So I'm not sure if Rice would be able to suit Guardiola's system as well as he does. I think he'd be perfect for United. But that Edward would... Well, he's gone now. The Glazers have all the football knowledge of a dead pigeon, so whether they actually spot him as an option is another thing. So I think United really is the only option, and I doubt he's at the top of their priorities at the moment.
That's a nice line there. Okay, final question, Alfie, then. So there's a bit more. You can go a bit more hot takey. I know you like your hot takes. Out of England's squad, then going into the Euros, if you were to rank every player in order of importance, where does Rice sit?
I think Kane is certainly first, just because being unbiased, I think he's brilliant. I think creative-wise, he's brilliant.
When you're not looking at the Tottenham score?
No, I'm not looking at the Tottenham score. I don't know what it is, but I'm hoping they've dropped some points. But yeah, I'd say Kane is the most important player. Then I genuinely do think, just because of the lack of options, I'm not saying he's better than players like Foden or a great.
Yeah, it's just an importance.
Yeah, I'd say he's probably second or third. Whether I know Gary Neville said Harry Maguire is second, but I'm not sure I would go with that. I think I'd go with Rice second, and yeah, I personally would say he's probably England's second most important player, just because of the lack of options we have in that area, especially with Henderson injured at the moment.
Well, I think I would almost completely agree. The only person to put above him is Nick Pope, because if Nick Pope's injured, that means Gareth Southgate starting the equivalent of a disabled monkey in goal in Jordan Pickford. So
yeah, I think he'll start anyway, if I'm honest, Pickford.
Yeah, probably, yeah. But yeah, thanks for coming on, mate. That was a very, very good insight into Declan Rice. I think we've all learned a little bit about him there, and some great research done. Do you want to plug anything before we head back to the podcast?
Just follow me, to everyone watching, please follow me on Instagram, WestHamOnline, if you're a West Ham fan. If you're not, you can as well, but I don't know why you would.
I mean, I'm not a West Ham fan, and I follow you on Instagram. You've been putting great posts up recently, so anybody who's not a West Ham fan, anyone who's not a West Ham fan, go and follow him. Thanks,
And
Alfie.
and WestHamOnline 5 on Twitter.
There we go. Thanks, Alfie. Let's go back to the podcast.
Thank you, everyone.
That was that, and that will be the end of the podcast. Ritwik, is there anything else left to say? Obviously, you haven't heard interview about Rice yet, so just your baseline thoughts. How important do you think Rice is to England? And Declan Rice, not the food. And and how irreplaceable do you think he is? Because there's not many lone DMs.
There are more DMs than there used to be. Obviously, with Calvin Phillips and James Ward-Prowse, but he has a huge task in his hands because we don't know whether Jordan Henderson's going to come back and if he's going to be fit for the Euros, and that's a big one because Declan's going to have to pull double duty for screening the defense and starting the attacks. It's probably not going to be the main box-to-box choice, but with Henderson's absence, there's going to be a lot more for him to do.
Absolutely. I think with Declan Rice as well, even though you've got Calvin Phillips in, I think with Rice, he's probably England's best lone defensive midfielder. So if there are injuries, if he gets injured as well, I think England are in massive trouble. And I think he's probably their big reason. England's only hope of playing a 4-3-3 because he's the only one who can really hold back the sea and play like Henderson or Mount and Foden ahead of him. I feel like if Declan Rice is out, we're doomed for a 5 at the back.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that'll be the end of Eurowatch this week. Me and Ritwik we're only allowed to talk for 20 minutes this episode. Ritwik, we'll do an hour on next week. Go back to normal.
Alrighty. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back again next week. Lots of content to come. We're going to be ramping it up, a few special pods for you in the near future. So keep tuned in, and we'll give you the scoop.
Ritwik's absolutely right there. We've got some very exciting podcasts coming in. So keep an eye out for that. And catch you later, guys.